And so they were telling the buyers that there were other offers on the table and that they would need to increase their offer. In fact, there were no other offers whatsoever.
You're listening to the Ottawa Real Estate Podcast, your go-to source for all things Canadian real estate. And now, here are your hosts, Paul Stevenson and David Warren. Hello and welcome back to the Ottawa Real Estate Podcast, your go-to source for all things Canadian real estate. My name is Paul Stevenson. I'm a level 2 mortgage agent. I'm joined as always by David Warren, level 2 mortgage agent, owner at Referral Mortgages. And we just want to take a quick minute to thank our sponsors, Guertin, Poirier, Avocates lawyers, CENTUM, and Big Insurance in Westboro. David, how are you? How are you doing? Summer is rolling. We're August.
It is flying by. The summer is crazy. We're mid-August. We should give listeners a heads up that we will be taking the next 2 weeks off for summer vacation. So we will be back September 3rd, right after the Labor Day weekend. So just a heads up on that. But we figured we'll give you a good full show today to make up for missing last week and for the 2 weeks to come that we won't be on, but we'll have lots of content when we do get back.
We were driving to Madden Soccer yesterday, and he tells us, we're 60% of the way through the year now, and we're actually closer to 2050 than year 2000 now. I was like, wow, really making me feel old here with the 2050 reference. But it is what it is. Numbers don't lie. We're closer to 2050 than year 2000. So Y2K5, whatever the 2050 is. We got lots to cover today, Dave. I know, first and foremost, we're both big Sens fans. Okay. Born and raised in Ottawa myself. You're kind of mostly raised in Ottawa.
I've been adopted. Yeah.
You migrated here at a young age, eh? And now you're an Ottawa citizen. But the Sens have landed on the purchase in LeBreton Flats.
It's huge.
Big step.
Yeah. They supposedly for around $30 million. They haven't announced what the amount is, but supposedly around $30 million. I gather back many years ago, there was the dispute between Eugene Melnyk and the NCC on value. And back then it was deemed as being around 35. So, but there was pushback from the NCC, but apparently it's around that purchase price this time around. And they're looking to, I guess, try to get things going as quickly as possible if the government will allow it. But I guess there is still some sort of federal involvement as well from the federal government. So I'm sure that'll backlog things another few years. So who knows when shovels will go in the ground, but let's hope it's sometime soon.
Yeah. So the whole deal is set to be for a total of 11 acres, and similar to, I believe, what they did at TD Place, formerly Lansdowne. I call it Lansdowne forever. It's forever Lansdowne in Ottawa. It's just like the Palladium, Corral Center, whatever you want to call it. It's moving.
100%.
So 11 acres, they want to develop it as kind of like a, sort of city center, restaurants, cafes, kind of pregame, postgame, nice buzz. It's right on the light rail, which is great for anyone living in Ottawa. And now us being just outside the city, not ideal, but for anyone who's in Ottawa, I think it's great for the city. How do you see this like kind of reshaping the nightlife, kind of city life in Ottawa with that relocation?
Well, being that I am downtown,
a block
like
away
yourself, and it's basically a 3-minute bike ride from my house, and also or 2 stops on the LRT behind Preston. I think it's fantastic for the downtown core. I think it's fantastic for the citizens of Ottawa in general. Right now, games are light because it's so far west. There's nothing really around the stadium right now as far as restaurants or hotels or anything like that. So anyone coming from out of town, there's nowhere for people to stay easily and get to the game or be able to, have a bite to eat before or after. You kind of go a ways away, and you really only have those, that bridge to get in, and gets pretty clogged up. So I think having it on the LRT line, and maybe by then, by the time an arena is built, that the LRT will be running east to west, and people will be able to use public transit to get to the games, but being central. So, people in the East End, people in the West End, downtown, and help to revitalize, hopefully, some of those businesses that are downtown and kind of bring that corporate, some corporate money and sponsorship to the team as well, which just helps the team thrive from what they can spend on payroll and all that, and kind of create a buzz like that. LeBreton Flats has just been, a dead zone for, ever. There's nothing been there, period. So I think that's a sore spot as far as like on the city, as far as, that use of land centrally. So I think if they do it right, it can be great. Like from not only just from the arena and for a concert venue and things like that, but additional hotels, additional restaurants, parks for the community, and kind of just reimagining what can be done down there. I think is going to be exciting as this progresses through. And there's actually an ownership now that has the means and drive to do it. And I think as plans roll out, will be certainly interesting.
Yeah, I think even from a tourism standpoint, like having everything so close to Parliament and everything walking distance,
Mm-hmm.
even people in Gatineau, right now, Madden and I were actually on a rafting trip 2 weeks ago, and there was a family. One of the families we were with was from Switzerland, and they were basically doing like a Canadian tour, and they were going to Ottawa, and they were huge hockey fans, being from Switzerland, and they were like, "Oh, the Senators playing right now. Like, we'd love to see a game." And I was like, "Oh, it's off season." They're like, "Oh, do you think we could get a tour of the stadium?" I'm like, "No, it's basically a ghost town in the off season. You might see Cirque du Soleil, or Bryan Adams, but you're not seeing any hockey there." But all that to say, like people that are coming to Ottawa that are hockey fans and that kind of want to be, it just becomes part of the cityscape.
Mm-hmm.
You go to Toronto, like Scotiabank Place, and like everything is central, everything's downtown. You go to any major city, like we're in Cleveland a couple years ago, the baseball stadium, the football stadium, like everything is walking distance, everything's central. Like no matter how you shape it, it's going to be better for the downtown core. I think right now most of the revenue is literally from parking. They have 5,000 cars paying
Yeah.
$30 a game or something at 150 grand a game. I think they can make up that revenue elsewhere, just by having people come in, spend time around the area, as you said, on sponsorships from corporate sponsors and people in the downtown core. So I think as a hockey fan, as someone, I think it's going to save the team as far as us being able to maintain that team forever or for a much longer period of time. And I also think just from for the downtown core, for local businesses, anyone around there, obviously real estate in that area, like it's all a plus. It's all going to be great.
From a real estate standpoint, it'll be interesting depending on how quickly they start to clean up the soil. It's a contaminated area, so there's obviously the decontamination that has to happen and all that. But depending on when they start to get shovels in ground, it's going to be very interesting because Preston corridor is now going to be flanked by, and there's always been the assumption that that's where the arena is going to be, but now with it moving forward is it coming to reality. But the Preston corridor is going to be flanked at the Carling end, a brand new state-of-the-art hospital with 5,000 employees, and on the other end of Preston being the new LeBreton Flats development of 11 acres, including hotel and residences. I heard this morning, the talk of 2,200 units, plus hotel, plus restaurants, plus parks and the arena and all that. So huge developments and huge necessity for housing on both ends. And from a value standpoint, for those within that corridor, poses a lot of interest for people that are existing landowners or property owners, and those looking in that area. I think it'll become extremely desirable, and values skyrocket, I think, in that corridor along there.
And just in closing, like, do you think buying the land was the easy part, or do you think kind of the real game is going to be getting through those approvals and the construction itself?
I think getting the land deal done to begin with, because once it's actually, if they've come to an agreement on price, I'm not sure what the component or involvement of the feds, what that requirement is, but obviously NCC land is an offshoot of the federal government. But once it's through, like them agreeing to a price, I think is the biggest hurdle and biggest step. It kind of seemed like, because this has been ongoing for quite a long period of time, and I know they were looking at other venues as well, or locations to build instead. So them kind of narrowing this down, once I think they already have plans in place. They already know what they're planning on building, and so I think it should be, once they're able to kind of get over this last hurdle of feds kind of signing off on it, I think it'll kind of start moving along pretty quickly.
Yeah, I agree.
At least
I agree. Well, time will tell. We're on track. 2018. We'll see what happens. So housing stats. July stats are out. I wanted to kind of get into the stats. I'm going to just pull them up here for everyone to take a look at, and then we can kind of speak to them. So here we go. So Ottawa remains resilient. The haters are going to hate this. And honestly, I feel like the numbers speak for themselves, but I was kind of surprised to see the numbers being so positive. Sales 1,318 home sales in July, so that's up 4.9% from last year, but down from June. Average price of $695,209, so that's up 2.2% year over year. The year-to-date average up 3%, so 702,840. There's 2,549 new listings, so that's up 11.7% year over year. Active listings are up 14% year over year. Inventory is at 3.2 months, so that indicates a balanced market. I think you've said that before, about 3 months is kind of like a perfectly balanced market. And then by type, so single family, 704,800, so that's up 2%. Townhomes, 468,000, that's up 8.3%. And apartment condos down 1.6%, so 411,900. Condos downtown seem to be softer, are kind of, in quotes, stable employment. Steady population growth kind of helps buffer the market from big swings, as we know. Like, Ottawa's a fairly insulated market. But something I heard actually on another podcast this morning, the Angry Mortgage podcast with Ron Butler, he had Dan Foch on, and he was talking about the Toronto Real Estate Board, which now also covers Ottawa. We've talked about this before on the show, that the days on market is not always a good indicator, because realtors are oftentimes kind of taking properties off, relisting them, and it kind of skews those numbers. The Toronto Real Estate Board has kind of caught on to that, and they now have two figures on their MLS data. One for property days on market, so total days. So if you bring it up 4 times, if you've listed it 4 times for 10 days, it's going to say 40 days as far as the property days on market, so PDOM. And then there's listing days on market. So you'll actually be able to see both. So they're kind of catching on to the fact that there was so many people kind of delisting and relisting and so on. So I think that's great as far as transparency, just because it wasn't uncommon 5-10 years ago to see, 110 days on market. Like, that was just kind of like, oh, okay, well, maybe they're willing to negotiate a bit more, or maybe they're not, or like, it was just not that uncommon. Now it seems like as soon as it hits like 30 days, sellers kind of panic or what have you, and it's kind of taken off and relisted a month later, 2 months later. So what do you think about all that data, Dave? I just threw a whole bunch of stuff at you, so I'm going to take a sip of my water here.
I think the average up 3% across the board is kind of, actually, I think going back to the beginning of the year, I think we predicted around 3 to 5% still for this year. Obviously, at the year end, we'll go back to what those predictions were, but I think we were back then talking about that. The balanced market is still good to see. Again, there's places sitting, there's places not, and I know a lot of realtors also do that so that it's fresh in people's searches. Like, just to kind of hit those fresh people's kind of searches. But I think overall in the Ottawa area, it's been pretty consistently balanced, throughout. I know that 3 months kind of indicates that, but even from a growth standpoint, I think it's good seeing that low single digit. It's allowing people, number one, the market is in Ottawa is maintaining stability. We're not seeing huge fluctuations, which I think is good, because it allows for people to predict, what's going on. And gives people the opportunity to, get in the market knowing that it continues to be a stable market, and not like the Toronto market is seeing, or any of the others. So there was an article with Roy LePage, Q2 2025 spring market update, or kind of a forward-looking prediction or market outlook. And they're seeing on a national aggregate home prices up just 0.3% year over year, but down 0.4% from Q1. So pretty well even across the board, but it is in different markets skewed. So, they're seeing Montreal up 3.5, Quebec City up 13.5. So outperforming really most other areas. Toronto being down, Vancouver being down. Of course, that does, that obviously makes sense. So across the board nationally, I think, you're going to see a lot of the different areas picking up the slack, where putting that number up higher from where Toronto or Vancouver are. However, the number of transactions and volume typically within Toronto is one in which, the other markets, it takes a lot for the other markets to really kind of make up some of that ground from a national average standpoint. So I think, we're still going to continue seeing that. So I think it's important for people not to look at that national number, and always look at the individual market where you're in or where you're looking at moving to. The national numbers are going to be always are going to be skewed because of the volume of transactions between, Fredericton and Toronto, or even Fredericton and Charlottetown. Number of transactions are going to be significantly different, which obviously skews those figures. So yeah, I think the market is going to continue chugging along. I expect August to come in slow as far as transactions, prototypical for the market cycle in all markets because of kids being out, summer vacations, even ourselves taking a vacation the next 2 weeks from this show. And so I think, with that, it's kind of typical leading into the new school year that we talked about it last show, that there's always this lull through August. So I think we'll see August numbers dip and we'll see then activity pick up again in September.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, even the 24 days on market to me seemed kind of surprisingly low. I think in August, we'll probably see that tick up a bit. Kind of, if I had to predict it, I'd say probably, in the 30 to 35 day range, just because it seems like we're always kind of keeping an eye on the market. But as you said, August is always a bit slower. Anyone who listed kind of end of July is probably going to see their property. Obviously, the hot properties are going to sell quickly, but I would say of all the buyers that I have currently pre-approved, some of them have directly told me, we're going away in August, we're going out east, we're doing this, we're doing that, and they're taking a break. So I don't think it's that, it's very common, as you said. People want to kind of do their own things before kids get back into school, things kind of pick up again, and then, we'll probably see, as usual, things kind of pick up September, October, November. But time will tell. We'll see rates have ticked up again this week, which again, it's an indicator of many other things. The job numbers, which is something else I wanted to touch on here. So since we're talking about it, I'll touch on it quick.
Are you trying to grow your mortgage business? CENTUM has the tools and support to help you take your business to the next level. Get access to everything from free unlimited custom marketing to daily direct pay. Find out what your business can do with CENTUM. Learn more at joincentum.ca. Your home is one of your biggest investments, and the team at Big Westboro can help you protect it. Our expert brokers will find the perfect coverage to keep your home and belongings safe. Call 613-239-5792 or visit thebig.ca/Westboro for a free quote. Think big. Protect what matters most. Are you thinking of buying or selling a residential property? Relationships are at the heart of every real estate transaction. At Guertin, Poirier, Avocates, Lawyers, we love to bring residential buyers, sellers, agents, lenders, mortgage brokers, and the law together to close the deal for you. For an effortless client experience that opens doors, call us at 613-744-4488 or visit our website at guertinpoirierlaw.ca. Let's get to the heart of your deal.
Canada job updates in July. So Canada lost 41,000 jobs in July, but the unemployment rate stayed at 6.9%. So youth employment, so that's people 15 to 24, fell to 53.6%. So that's the lowest since 1998 outside of the pandemic years. Full-time work fell by 51,000, mostly in private sector roles in recreation, construction, and business services. Transportation and warehousing added 26,000 jobs. Average hourly wages rose 3.3% year over year. So these numbers increase kind of speculation that the Bank of Canada could cut interest rates in September. I don't think so, but what do you think, Dave? How do those job numbers impact kind of the real estate market and the overall economy, in your opinion?
I mean, bleak employment numbers and bleak economic numbers, which is what we've been seeing roll out last week and this week. The U.S. was absolutely terrible for their employment numbers, to the point where, and also their adjustment of their numbers, the previous numbers that they'd put out. And the U.S. Stats Canada does a good job of hitting the figures and not really having this adjustment at a later announcement. Whereas the U.S., they'll come out with a headline number, and underneath that, kind of in a subtext, will be that the revision of employment numbers from the previous month and a previous announcement will be revised drastically to the tune of hundreds of thousands of jobs. So last week, with the U.S. employment numbers coming out being absolutely terrible, huge revisions, they were so bad that Mr. Trump actually fired the head of the U.S. statistics and employment statistics department because of how bad the numbers have been, but also how bad the reporting has been in the U.S., which we've seen for a very long period of time, that they've had these massive revisions, these headline numbers, which kind of mask what actually is going on, and then these huge revisions. But the U.S. numbers have been terrible as well. Canada, we're starting to see that as well. I think the US is starting to see inflation become an issue again, simply because of tariffs. And we're starting to see it here with job losses and that tariff issue kind of roll through. I think there will be, I think the odds of a September decrease by the Bank of Canada is becoming higher and higher. With the negative employment information, the bond market actually has gone down this last week and a half by, I think it's 10 or 15 basis points. And interestingly enough, most banks have actually increased their rates. I'm not sure why, but they're kind of increasing that margin. But the most important that I think in those rate changes, those are the fixed rate changes, but at the same time, they've also been compressing the discount on prime. So for variable rate mortgages, they've actually been continuously lowering that discount to prime, which to me signals that the banks are expecting the Bank of Canada to lower bank prime in coming up announcements. And the reason why they compress or decrease their discount to prime is so that they increase their margin on variable. And so a lot of times what I find is that as they're expecting that the Bank of Canada to make a decrease, that they will shrink that discount so that their margins aren't as eroded as it would be otherwise. And we saw that earlier in the year. We were upwards of almost prime minus 1%, prime minus 0.9, and even a year ago. And as we've started to have the Bank of Canada drop bank prime, we've been seeing that erosion of that discount to prime. And in most cases now you're in that prime minus 0.5 to prime minus 0.6 range from prime minus 0.9 to prime minus 1. So that's kind of, I see that sometimes as a sign of an early indicator of what the banks are possibly expecting from the Bank of Canada on a go-forward basis too.
Yeah, so just touching on the U.S. job numbers and Canadian. So StatsCan, who obviously kind of puts his data together, Steve Saretsky, who is someone that we mentioned previously that we're hoping to have on the show this fall, he was saying that in June there was 83,000 jobs gained, and then in July we had basically 41,000 jobs lost. So it seems like the numbers are skewed. And Mikhail Scooteroo, who replied to his post on X this week, said the standard error on the employment level estimate is 52,200. So part of the month-to-month variation is random. That's what you get from sample estimates. He was basically saying that the sample size of the current population survey, so the CPS, is roughly the same as the LFS, which I guess is the labor force survey maybe in the US. So it's 60,000 households. So it's kind of hard to get like a true, like even if these numbers sound like extreme, I think they kind of they do a small survey of 60,000 and they kind of extrapolate it across the country. So they are estimates. Like that's why there's such a variance. Like I know people are probably going to say, well, last month it was because I saw that. And I said, well, I know we were talking about a whole bunch of jobs created in June and now there's a whole bunch of jobs lost. But as we've talked about before too, a lot of the jobs created are part-time jobs and a lot of the jobs lost are full-time jobs. So it's really hard to get a true, like, accurate picture of what's happening with jobs in Canada because every month we're getting kind of conflicting data. So it's like we don't really know. And the numbers kind of come out in other ways. That's kind of what you're speaking to, is that you kind of have to look at more like macro data after looking at the micro data, because the micro data doesn't always tell like the true story of what's happening. And I think personally, like we're in a much more challenging financial position as a country than is kind of being led on. Now, the 41,000 jobs obviously doesn't look great, but when we look at like the housing market and things like that, like it looks like everything is kind of status quo, but we'll see, we'll see what comes in the coming kind of 6 months. Still a lot of mortgages coming up for renewal too. There's a lot of people that, bought in the kind of 2020 to 2022 range that haven't seen the impact of those increased rates and increased cost of living and so on. Now rent is down across the country, so I think that does help some people. But the people that are holding those homes that others are renting are going to see an increase in cost. So eventually at some point that's, you'd think, going to have to be passed off in some way, right? Maybe I'm completely misreading the data, but that's just what I think, I guess.
Yeah, speaking on the economy, kind of a quick summary when I was mentioning about the revisions in the US numbers that they came out last week, they revised their previous payroll numbers by 258,000 jobs less. So it was a revision down. Crazy. That they misreported, and it was a negative revision of 258,000 jobs.
Yeah.
So looking at that, figure, a lot of times in the US, they'll have a headline number, but then they're revising underneath it down, and there's not a lot of focus on that. Jobless claims in the US, highest levels since November 2021. So right in this middle of COVID. S&P corporate bankruptcies is the highest level since 2010, based on the S&P Global. So there's, in Canada, have right now Canadian consumer insolvency saw the biggest June since 2010. So this is individuals filing for consumer insolvency, whether that's a consumer proposal or bankruptcy. So since 2010, we're at the highest numbers since then. And U.S. jobless claims are at one of the highest levels, kind of dating back, through the years. But right now, this past month was at certainly the highest level by leaps and bounds throughout the years. So I think, as really with the real estate market and how it parlays here is as the U.S. Has issues and their numbers come out, it drastically affects us and everything they do, and in turn affects our bond market, affects what the Bank of Canada does, and we have to obviously pivot accordingly. So, September, there's a pause in August for decision. Obviously, as you all know, there was a pause on rate hold by the Bank of Canada, I guess a week or two ago. So the next announcement, I believe, is September 12th, maybe, so a month away. So we'll see what kind of figures come out between now and then, and how, what the July and August figures look like. Again, this tariff issue continues to roll along. Nothing's been put in place as far as a trade deal, and there's continues to be narrative of increases to the tariffs, et cetera. So I think the Bank of Canada's got at a challenging time, but I think they're getting to the point where they are going to have to start decreasing prime, because the Canadian economy, unfortunately, relies so heavily right now on real estate. And if there's no real estate transactions and people aren't able to buy and sell and move, there's actually a massive proportion of our GDP relies on it. And right now we're not getting it from other sources.
This is an interesting thing that I saw the other day that I wanted to show. This shows the S&P 500 is like the top 500 companies in the US, right? As far as like market cap and so on. So this shows the S&P 490. So basically you can see the top 10 stocks are doing extremely well since June of 2021. And then the other 490 are basically either flat or declining. So basically showing that like the US economy is kind of being bolstered or held up by these 10 companies, which are, the Nvidias, Teslas, Meta, Google, all the kind of big tech companies right now in the US. On the flip side, I looked at Canada's top 10 company from via market cap, Shopify being number one, which is great, local Ottawa business. And then the next 9 were basically banks. So pretty much all the major banks, Brookfield and Brookfield Asset Management. So Canada's economy essentially being propped up by the financial institutions and one private organization, well, not private, but, public company. I think there's a lot of opportunity in Canada for us to also grow like our private sector and kind of develop Canadian businesses, essentially. We have a lot of opportunity here, but
maybe tap into some resources. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
Anyways.
Dave, you had a fun, I say fun in quotes, story about an issue that an Ottawa seller had. And I think this is something that people often fear, but this kind of brings it to light. So maybe if you just want to touch on that quickly.
Ontario seller, not Ottawa seller.
That's correct. Apologies.
So it was it's kind of interesting. I came across it of a lawsuit that happened between a buyer and a seller, where in the case Tran versus Brickman, an Ontario seller falsely claimed that there were multiple registered offers when they weren't. Thinking they were in a bidding war, the buyers upped their offer by $55,000. The court found that they were misled and awarded damages for their loss of a chance to negotiate fairly. The seller's appeal was dismissed. And a reminder that phantom offers can be costly for sellers and agents, kind of as a very quick summary. But effectively what happened is the seller, who in this article of the findings of this court case didn't clearly and explicitly mention it, but I found it in the comments and summary by other lawyers, that the seller was actually a registered realtor. So I think that is extremely important to this case. And the buyers were represented by a realtor, and the buyers and their representative were told by the seller that there were registered offers. They were expecting another offer. They had offers where they had to respond by a certain time, by 11 p.m. that night, and things like that. And so they were telling the buyers that there were other offers on the table and that they would need to increase their offer. In fact, there were no registered offers. There were no other offers whatsoever. What I thought was interesting about this was, I mean, that's obviously terrible. And if you're going into an offer situation, every offer made, the realtor is to register that offer on file and record that for actually the real estate board. So for RICO, that they actually have to register how many offers there were on that property. And in a case, what I found interesting, and I did not know about this because it came up in the comment section of people asking, how did these buyers even find out or know that there weren't any other competing offers? And I thought what was interesting in this, kind of as a takeaway, other than obviously it being terrible by the seller of not, acting properly, or by the law, and especially being a registered realtor not following the law, but that if you're ever involved in a multiple offer situation and you want to know how many offers there were, if you are involved in that transaction, you can actually request from RICO to find out how many registered offers there were on that property. They will only disclose that information to individuals that were involved in that offer, not to others outside, so not third parties. Only if you have submitted an offer and you have a registered offer on that property, that you can contact RICO to find out after the fact of how many there were. So I thought that was interesting, kind of a tidbit that I kind of took away from that. But it obviously also demonstrated that that sellers and buyers need to act appropriately, and the sellers especially. It's unfortunate that this realtor acted in this way, but they was passed through not only through the courts, but also on the appeals court, threw it out, and they basically settled at that difference. So they were offering 1.25, they bought it for 1.305, and so the judge actually basically cut and awarded the buyer an award of $37,500, basically splitting the difference between the two, under the assumption that had there been a proper and fair chance for them to negotiate, that there would have been a back and forth and likely split it down the middle. I always joke to realtor friends where it's just like, why not just one person's here, one person's there, it's just going to be split down the middle. The back and forth becomes funny sometimes, but sometimes that's the name of the game. People like to go to have that back and forth, but so that's what the judge awarded, was kind of splitting it in half, saying that the seller owes that to the buyers because they didn't give them that fair shake.
Yeah, and I've had many instances, both buying and selling, where a home's been sitting for 30, 35 days, show interest, and that same day they get an offer, or you put in an offer and that same day they get another offer, and you're like, what are the chances, But also, having been on the listing side and speaking with agents that we work with, oftentimes if they have people that have shown interest at an open house or what have you, and then they get an offer, they're contacting those people and saying, hey, we now have an offer. If you're still interested, now's the time to kind of get back into the game, And that's oftentimes why you see no offers and then 2 or 3 all at the same time, because they're kind of doing that additional due diligence, or the buyer's agent says, like, if you get an offer, tell me, and my buyers might come back to the table or what have you. So these things do happen in honest cases as well. But in this case, obviously not the case. But just for people listening that are thinking, realtors are just all saying this, oftentimes that's kind of what happens, is that they actually get an offer, they contact the people that were interested previously, maybe a week before, or maybe they even put an offer in, but they couldn't come to terms. Now they have a real buyer that's actually putting another offer, and they go back to the person and say, hey, we have another offer now. Are you still interested, or have you guys kind of given up on this property type thing? So from your experience, like, have you ever felt that you're being kind of upped your bid to cause a bidding war, or do you kind of agree with what I'm saying, that this is, well, you could have both, but I mean, like, what are your thoughts on that, and what has been your experience in buying and selling?
So I as well have been on both, on the buy side in multiple offers, and I've also actually a couple of times been on the buy side in multiple offers, and on the sell side I've been in multiple offers. Really, exactly as you said, and a lot of times it kind of seems funny that a property's been sitting maybe for 30 days and they get an offer, and then there's 2 others. Again, this goes to, advice that if you think, for people, I didn't know this before reading this article, that you can contact RICO after the fact and ask, how many registered there were. So, you could actually know exactly those numbers, and they're supposed to be reported by that realtor. But certainly on the buy side, I've preemptively submitted an offer before, when there wasn't an offer presentation date, because there was so much interest. It got, like, they actually did not accept offers, and they said, okay, we're going to do an offer date. and I was in on a property with 12 other offers. You know, it wasn't, you know, something where I had to, you know, it's a matter of whether, you know, you really want that property or not. And sometimes people certainly get caught up in that. And we saw that the most obviously through the pandemic, people not wanting to miss out and willing to bid, you know, significantly over that asking price. I mean, it goes both ways. I haven't been in a situation where I've felt I have to. In that case, I was one of 13 other offers, and it's the house I live in now, and we ended up being that winning offer by increasing it because we wanted the house. On the flip side, on the sell side, you know, it was exactly that same situation. You know, we had a couple of offers, and we contacted all of not we, but myself and the realtor that I was working with, contacted everyone that was interested and got additional offers in. There is now, and I haven't heard of any cases yet or situations where it's happened, but there is now the ability to have a transparent bidding as well. You know, that came in, I think maybe, what was it, a year and a half ago or something like that, where, you know, you can actually have the cards on the table of these are what the other offers are. I believe that, you know, it's up to the sellers, I believe. We'll have to get more clarity for around that rule.
Somebody will throw it in the comments, I'm sure.
Yeah,
if
I'm
they're
sure.
still listening at this point.
True. Yeah. No, I mean, really, on the sell side, you're obviously hoping for that bidding war because you want to get the most money for your property. And on the buy side, you don't want any other offers because you want to get the best deal possible. So, you know, that's obviously human nature. It's a business transaction.
Mood boost, David? What do you think?
I was just about to say, should we slide in some mood boosts to leave these? And they better be good ones, especially with 2 weeks off. You got to come with some heat here.
Holiday boost. Okay, here we go. Used to be addicted to the hokey pokey, but then I turned myself around. And last but not least, working in a mirror factory is something I can totally see myself doing.
You know what? I like the last one, not bad. I like the dumb ones. You know?
Yeah, they're all pretty dumb.
I like they're all really dumb, but yeah, not bad.
Just a reminder to everyone, we're going to be off for the next 2 weeks. So we'll be back the first week of September. We wish you a great summer, safe summer. Okay. We're always here. If you have questions, you want to chat about real estate, mortgages, give us a shout. And we want to give one quick shout out as well to our amazing sponsors, Guertin, Poirier, Avocates Lawyers, Big Insurance in Westboro, and CENTUM. Thank you for your support. And thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Deuces.